Good morning. My name is Sara Forrest. I'm your worship associate today. So I had an interesting thing happen this winter when my dad was visiting for the holidays, and we went out to lunch, normal, and over lunch he was telling me a story, and he ended the story with, well, it was probably because of my ADHD. And I thought, what? He said, yeah, my ADHD. And I said, you have ADHD? He says, yes. I had never known that before, 44 years old. And it changed a lot about what I had noticed about him as a kid. I had always thought of him as the nutty professor type, brilliant, creative, prone to losing things or wandering off in a crowd, prone to periods of deep hyperfocus without regard to eating, drinking water, sleeping. And all of a sudden, I just felt this shift happen in how I thought about my dad, and I think it helped me understand him a little bit better. And him knowing that helped him understand himself as well. What is also truly remarkable about the fact that I never noticed this proclivity in my father is that I am literally a clinician whose job it is sometimes to diagnose and detect signs of ADHD and support those who have it. Currently, I work in a high school age special education setting, and my job as a social worker is to provide mental health to students, but also to consult with teachers and advocate for the people I work with so they can get a great educational experience. Many of the people I serve identify as autistic, many have ADHD, many have learning differences, and in short, we have a very neurodiverse space, which translates to many different learning needs. This can look like frequent breaks, needing access to sensory spaces or tools. Some of our students need to sit on a floor instead of a desk. Some students need academic work adapted to connect to special interests they have. And crucially, there is a need to access quiet spaces for decompression and breaks. I have immense gratitude towards all the students I've had the privilege to serve. They have pushed me to look at the activities of society differently and help me question, why do things have to be done this way? Just by virtue of re-examination, the world becomes expanded. I've learned many, many things from my neurodiverse students, but I will share some of the highlights. One, sometimes a body has just got to move. Make sure there's space. Two, navigating spaces designed for neurotypical people is exhausting. Give time and space for rest. And three, never assume you know someone based on their diagnoses. If we think of neurotypes as being on a bell curve, many spaces are designed around a very small section of that curve, that which we have defined as normal or standard. But there are so many people on either side of it. So ultimately, who are these rules and expectations of behavior really serving? In our school, I'm proud to say that I've noticed a shift toward making more room for different learning styles and for our neurodiverse students. When I approach teachers about some of the students I work with, the focus isn't so much on what does this student need to do to conform to my classroom, and more, how can this classroom be flexible to meet the needs of this student? This year, we have a neurodiversity club that was founded and led by students. And just last week, they gave presentations to the student body about their experiences at our school. I am so grateful for this movement towards inclusion because in many places, the demand is on the neurodiverse person to do what we call masking. That is conforming to the norms dominant society has defined. This is exhausting work, and I've seen it take a devastating toll on a person's mental health. People with low support needs to high support needs are left to internalize a sense that they are wrong in some way. They're expected to fit in at the cost of their own well-being or to hide who they are for fear of stigma. And we know, and I hope we hold as a value here, that the world is always better when people are free to be their authentic selves. In classrooms that are inclusive, I've observed that it's not just the identified student who benefits when room is made. The whole classroom becomes more engaging, more enriching, simply by the fact that more people can participate and more of their brilliance can be shared. We have a long way to go in deconstructing the norms that are harmful or limiting to neurodiverse people. I'm grateful to activists in the autistic, ADHD, and disability rights community who are advocating for more inclusive spaces and who are being vulnerable to share their experiences so the world can grow. I hope we can listen to these voices and those of our family and friends. I hope we can find communities where we can be our true selves and that we can all remain curious about each other without judgment. And I'm inspired by the lovely song of Ashley to just share that little Mr. Rogers. I don't know if you knew the It's You I Like. What was it he always said at the end of his show? You're right, just the way you are, and there's no one in the whole world like you. Thank you.
Our reading today is edited from What is Neurodiversity? And this is according to the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, which is an organization of autistic people who believe nothing about us without us. And so this is their definition. They say neurodiversity means that no two brains are exactly the same. Every person has things that they are good at and things they need help with, and there is no such thing as a normal brain. The neurodiversity movement says that people with brain-based disabilities, like autism, intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, or mental health disabilities, should be accepted and included in society, just like neurotypical people, people without brain-based disabilities. The neurodiversity movement also says that we shouldn't try to cure or get rid of autism. Autistic people should be allowed to exist, and we should work to make sure that everyone gets the accommodations that we need to reach our full potential. Autism is a developmental disability. It affects many things about the way we learn, move, communicate, and experience the world. Disability is a natural part of human diversity. However, our society is set up in a way that excludes people with disabilities, including autistic people. Our society says that disability is the problem, and the solution is to cure the disability or to try and make people less disabled. The disability rights movement says that people with disabilities are not the problem. Instead, society is the problem when it doesn't accommodate people with disabilities. Autistic Self-Advocacy Network is part of the disability rights movement. The disability rights movement works to make sure that disabled people have equal opportunities, get the supports that we need, and can participate in all areas of society. The disability rights movement is one part of the larger civil rights movement. Many communities, like the LGBTQ community, women, and communities of color, have fought and are still fighting for their rights. Disabled people are a part of every community. Disability rights are civil rights, and civil rights are disability rights. I am going to tell you that in this sermon, I am going to talk about my family a lot, and it's really important to me that you know that I have their specific and express permission to talk about them. I don't tell stories about my family without running them by them first, and they all read this sermon and said yes and no and yes and yes, and it's important to me that you know that going in. My daughter Mika is autistic. In retrospect, there were lots and lots of clues, but she was born in 1998, and we didn't know as much about autism as we do now. She had lots of sensory issues, especially around food. She would not eat solid foods that came at her on a spoon so she didn't really eat solid foods till she could pick them up with her fingers and feed herself at about 1. She could remember anything, and she talked super early and well, but she would parrot. And so instead of, what you would expect a toddler to say, park, or go park, she would say, Do you want to go to the park? But she was incredibly smart. The story that I tell sometimes about this is that when she was about 22 months old, I put her in the bathtub and she said, all the letters. And I said, you want the whole package of, those foam letters and numbers that come in different colors that are bathtub toys? I said, you want them all in there? And she said, yes. So I dumped the whole tub in there. And she looks around for a second and she said, where's the P? It's not in there? No. What color is it? Orange. Okay. It was tucked outside underneath the shower curtain in a place that she could not have seen that, but she could look around, know every letter and number, and realize which one was missing. We knew then that things were not going to be typical. She was clearly different. I took her to get tested because she had some noticeable physical delays. She walked on schedule, but she didn't run or jump and was less coordinated than her peers. But her language was so advanced that it skewed the testing. I often said that Mika was either 99th percentile or 10th percentile in everything. She was not 50th percentile in anything. In Montessori school, her teacher Henry gave her remedial jumping lessons because at 4, she didn't know how to jump with 2 feet. So Henry gave her jumping lessons. We called her quirky. We all knew that she was different and that different was okay. We did the best we could, but sometimes it was hard for her and sometimes it was hard for us. She would sometimes do things like she was out visiting me in Chicago, and I had a friend who was wearing a fur coat and Mika had never met this person, and she ran up and hugged her and rubbed her face against the fur coat because she wanted to feel what it felt like. And so I'm trying to explain why that isn't something that we do, because we have to give people personal space. She really likes eating nachos with a spoon. You put sour cream and vinegar on them and crunch them all up, and then you eat them with a spoon. Some things, like how she eats nachos, she just gets to do however she wants. Some things, like we don't run up to strangers and rub our faces against them. We had to teach. It's all good. And for a long time that worked. Honestly, in the very early 2000s, autism wasn't on our radar, because the stereotype of autism then was boys who couldn't behave, locked inside the world of their own heads. How could my sweet, brilliant, kind daughter have autism? Because we didn't understand autism. It took learning more and her struggling with other mental health issues before we took her to a therapist who was certain that that was the issue. Mika went to Access, which is a public school program in Portland for highly gifted kids, many of whom were on the spectrum. Some of her teachers were great, but some of her teachers lost patience with her, bouncing up and down in the back of the class. I know many people with kids like Mika who chose not to pursue a diagnosis. They were afraid that labeling their kids would interfere with their chances of success and would saddle them with other people's reduced expectations. But for us, and for Mika, it was really valuable. It was valuable for Mika, who knew that she was weird or quirky, because instead of thinking that she was all alone, that something was wrong, she learned that there were a whole lot of folks out there with brains like hers that worked differently, in a really similar way to how her brain worked differently. And for us, and for her teachers, it really worked to shift the lens. My kid is bouncing up and down in the back of the classroom. Is she being disruptive? Or is she quietly getting her sensory needs met so she can concentrate like everyone else? Shifting the lens. I think, do folks feel like they know what neurodiversity is? Does that make sense? Do you still need an explanation, or do we feel like we have that? Okay. Autism is a condition that's usually first observed in early childhood. If you go by the American Heritage Dictionary, it looks like a painful, depressing disorder. Autism, noun. a pervasive developmental disorder characterized by severe deficits in social interaction and communication, by an extremely limited range of activities and interests, and often by the presence of repetitive stereotyped behaviors. Okay, here's where I have to say an extremely limited range of activities and interests. Let's see, my kid has gone through Latin, biology, invertebrates, homeopathic remedies, Dracula, the Magnus Archives. I'm not sure that qualifies as a limited range, but that's just me. A mental disorder characterized by inability to engage in normal social interactions and intense self-absorption, and usually accompanied by other symptoms such as language dysfunctions and repetitive behavior, and behavior showing an abnormal level of absorption with one's own thoughts and disregard for external realities. I like Autism Research Associates' less value-laden judgment list. They say individuals with autism may present a range of symptoms, such as reduced eye contact, differences in body language, lack of facial expressions, not engaging in imaginative play, repeating gestures or sounds, closely focused interests, indifference to temperature extremes. That seems a little more on point to me. Originally, most autistic research was done to try and eliminate autism. In the 50s and 60s, it was thought to be a disease of refrigerator mothers. Parents who were cold and unresponsive to their infants were blamed for autistic children. Can you imagine how painful that was for parents of kids with autism? In the 90s, some bad research came out that said that autism was correlated with vaccines, especially the MMR vaccine. And so concerned parents who didn't want their kids to be disabled would sometimes not vaccinate their kids for fear that that would hurt them. No parent wants to hurt their children. That study's been debunked several times over the last several years, but the fear remains. It did lead to one of Mika's favorite comics, however. Written by Zach Wiener-Smith, it's a single-panel Saturday morning breakfast comic with two people in lab coats talking. One says, "Wait a minute. Autism spectrum people are overrepresented in research science. But that means," and the other said, "My God, autism causes vaccines." In the 50s and 60s and 70s, parents were recommended to institutionalize their autistic kids. They were thought to never be able to communicate and were considered unteachable and even dangerous. Autism awareness in the 90s and 2000s was mostly famous people talking about what a tragedy this new skyrocketing epidemic was. It was focusing on the parents, not on the kids. Having a child with autism was considered a tragedy to a lot of people, and for some, desperate for help, unproven therapies were tried. And something called applied behavior therapy, which involved aversion therapy, or giving kids electric shocks or hitting them when they would stim or rock or engage in repetitive behaviors that made them not look normal. Applied behavior therapy can make kids look more normal. It's also listed as torture by some definitions. Approaches that do work include accessibility devices for communication. Lots of autistic people who couldn't speak could communicate through some other kind of facilitated communication, whether that was a picture board or flashcards or eventually iPads. Turns out lots of people who can't speak can actually type just fine. Facilitating communication made it much less frustrating for some folks on the spectrum. Can you imagine how frustrating it would be to not be able to communicate with the people around you about what you need when you're 5 or 10? Other folks on the spectrum talk just fine, and in fact, many autistic folks are highly intelligent. It can be tempting to talk about high-functioning or low-functioning autistic people, but many autistic people reject that language. stating that all folks with autism need some kinds of support and have some different abilities, and that ranking people based on intelligence or the ability to speak isn't helpful or appropriate. When Mika was diagnosed around 2009, she was identified as having Asperger's, which is a label that's now out of favor. Mika is brilliant. She got perfect scores on all of her SAT verbal and writing tests because she said the right answer was the one that didn't make me feel physically ill. She graduated from Mount Holyoke in Massachusetts with a double major in philosophy and psychology. And yet she struggled a lot in college, both with executive functioning, things like getting papers turned in on time and doing the paperwork, and with depression. Lots of people on the autism spectrum struggle with comorbidities. You heard today some of the kids, like, I have autism and ADHD, and Ehlers-Danlos, EDS. There are physical and mental conditions that are far more common in people with autism than in the general population, and these can include anxiety and depression, digestive issues and stomach pain, sleep disorders, and POTS, which is positional orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Mika has most of these, and chronic migraines to boot. She lives at home, happily, and works part-time as a caregiver through a home health organization. She feels a deep sense of satisfaction and joy about her job. She's always wanted to make the world a better place. And while we thought at one point that might be neuroscience or philosophy, turns out she's not really suited for a high-powered, stressful job. And she finds great meaning in making her corner of the world a better place. ADHD is the other most common neurodiversity diagnosis, like our special music today. Again, we might remember those stereotypes of hyperactive boy children who can't sit still in the classroom, keep interrupting. And again, in actuality, ADHD is a much broader term. My spouse, Dees, and my daughter, Marcella, both have ADHD. Mika does also, though hers is secondary to autism. Dees was diagnosed as an adult, and Marcella was diagnosed at 14. For both of them, hyperactive isn't a word you'd think to use. It was really kind of funny because when we were talking with the therapist about Marcella's diagnosis, one of the questions was, does she fidget a lot and move around? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. And Marcella said, how can you think that? And then I thought, oh, you don't fidget any more than I do you? Both of them hyper-focus. They can sink into a book or a special interest or a subject matter and completely lose track of time. They both have struggles with executive function. Dees talks about the ADHD tax, that extra money that you have to pay in late fees, or because you never cashed the check that's been sitting on your kitchen table for years now, under piles of junk mail in your tax forms from 6 years ago. Both Dees and Marcella are really, really smart, but their grades didn't always reflect that because they didn't turn their homework in. And they both need novelty in their lives. Dees works as an emergency department nurse. It's a great job for them because it's different every day and there's lots going on. Dees is working in a field where that ability to hyper-focus and that ability to pay attention to many things at once is a real strength. Marcella is working as a bank teller in a credit union. She especially enjoyed her job in the beginning when there was lots to learn and it was challenging. Now she's a little bored, and yesterday it seemed as though she might join the float pool instead of working in the same branch every day. Hopefully this will give her the novelty she's been craving. All of my family has come up with various coping mechanisms to deal with the challenges. For example, Dees never loses their keys or their wallet because they go in the same place every day. And nothing messes with work. It may be really hard for Dees to get places on their day off, but they never miss work unless they're sick. Mika puts alarms on her phone for things that I would not think about, like showering or taking out the trash and recycling. And she and her friends will sometimes call each other and do mutual accountability, and they'll remind each other to do basic self-care stuff like, Okay, it's time for me to shower. I'll text you in 5 minutes if I haven't gotten in. Or, Catherine, go to sleep already. It's 1 a.m. where you are. And Marcella has a group of friends that she met at the Women's Music Festival. They have a Discord group. They are from all over the U.S., and they're all autistic except Marcella, whose ADHD makes her fit in. They all got together for a long weekend, and I swear to God, their key activity was doing PowerPoint presentations on their special interests for everybody. Someone did an introduction to the dulcimer. Someone talked about how they build mechanical keyboards. Marcella did too. Historical fashion trends and the history and politics of Belarus. My quirky, interesting family enriches my life in so many ways. And sometimes they are hard to live with. I don't have stellar executive functioning skills myself. I can walk by half unpacked boxes left over from our move 5 years ago without seeing them. I struggle to start projects that I haven't done before or that have many steps. But I do have the basics of running a household down. And sometimes I get frustrated that the rest of my household isn't so great at getting the things that need to be done. I know that Deese wants to do the things. They know they need to go visit their parents, for example, or they want to go to the pottery studio. But it's become kind of a joke that I can make them get up, get dressed, get downstairs, and they will be eating breakfast when I have to walk out the door and go to work. And then I come home and they have never left the house. They just get paralyzed. It's called decision paralysis. And they aren't alone. Mika said about ADHD, for you, it's frustrating. For us, it's scary. And when I asked Deese what they would want people to know about neurodiversity, they said, no matter how frustrating it is for you dealing with us, it's way more frustrating for us. They said, it's like I get stuck and there's really no way I can do the thing, even when I want to do the thing. It is wonderful to have all kinds of brains in the world, but it is also true that some kind of brains need extra support. When I asked Mika what she wanted me to say about this subject, she said, the most important thing I want you to do is to strike a balance between gifts and strengths on one hand, and that these conditions can be really disabling sometimes. What neurodiversity advocates are saying is not that we aren't disabled, but rather that we have the right to exist and be ourselves. The National Autistic Society of Great Britain, an organization centered on autistic people and their families, did some incredible visioning work and developed something they called the Moonshot Vision, where they talked about a Great Britain that was truly disability and autism friendly could look like. They came up with some stories about autistic people functioning in a truly inclusive society. I'm going to read you 2 of them. The first one is Gemma and Maisie. And these folks are autistic. Gemma is driving her daughter Maisie to primary school. It's a non-uniform day, which caused Maisie some anxiety this morning. But Gemma showed her the text that all parents got. This helped Maisie not to worry that they had gotten the day wrong. Gemma's own anxieties are high today because after dropping Maisie off at school, she has to take her car for service, and sometimes the smells at the garage set off her sensory sensitivities. Maisie's teacher is in the playground when they arrive. She greets Maisie with a compliment on her choice of dinosaur jumper, knowing that dinosaurs are one of Maisie's special interests. Gemma sets off for the garage. One of the mechanics meets her on the forecourt outside the garage as they agreed ahead of time. He takes her keys and reassures Gemma that they will text her when her car is ready to be collected and will let her know if there are any issues or delays. And Mo regularly goes to watch his favorite football team play at their home field. He has a season ticket for an aisle seat so he doesn't feel trapped, and all the stewards at the stadium know who he is and keep an eye out for him at every match. Sometimes Mo needs someone to come with him, especially if the match is an important one with big crowds. The club always helps Mo book an extra seat right next to him if he needs that. Mo loves the excitement of watching live sport and enjoys talking to other fans about other players' statistics. The supporter who has the seat next to Mo often compliments him on his great memory and misses him if Mo can't make a match. The club management approached Mo about joining its board as a fan representative. They asked him about his communication needs and made sure written information is clear and sent in plenty of time for Mo to process it. Mo was allowed to shadow another board member before he started in the role so he could experience what the meetings are like. Mo is very happy to be involved in running the club he loves, and with his help, the club has made its grounds autism friendly. None of these changes are onerous. None of them cost a ton of money or are complicated. They just involve people being kind and maybe some foreshadowing of what's going to happen. What could we do around here to make things more friendly for folks who are neurodivergent? Maybe we could print off a couple of copies of the order of service to have in the back. We could have introduction slides to all the parts of the service. We could make sure that people know that it's okay to have your kids come up for time up for all ages or to stay in their seats. We have coloring sheets, and maybe we could have some fidget spinners. It's more friendly for some people to sit up in the balconies, and we can make sure folks know that that's an option. And that is one of the reasons that I make really sure that I welcome parents and kids who might not be able to sit still yet. Not everybody can sit still and be quiet. Like Sara said in her reflection, it's not just about making things better for the kid or adult with autism or ADHD. It's a way of making things better for everybody. We live in a diverse world. We have all kinds of races and genders and loves and ages and families. We have all kinds of bodies, and we have all kinds of brains. Let's make a space, a church, and a neighborhood and a world where all kinds of people can find a place to thrive. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.